Hi, I'm Sara from The Colorful Apple, and today I want to talk to you about engaging families in reading at home. We know how important it is for students to be reading every night at home, but when I first started teaching, this was something I really struggled with. I would ask my students to read every night. I even sent home book logs, which I'm not a fan of, but we'll talk about later, and they just weren't reading. I couldn't figure it out. One day I had one of my students come up to me, and this was a child who loved reading. She loved school, she was a great student, and she read as much as possible. So she came up to me and I could tell her something was wrong. So I asked her, and she said, "I didn't do my reading homework last night." And so I thought this was odd, so I said, "Oh, how come?" And she said, "I don't have any books at home." And I was devastated because not that she wasn't reading, but because I was asking my students to read and they didn't have access to books at home. This was such an issue. And so I realized I needed to dig deeper to figure out why my students weren't reading at home and figure out a way that I could help them. So some of the reasons they weren't reading were they didn't have access to books, or they had a couple books at home, but just not enough to be reading every single night. They were uncertain, not only them, but their families as well. They didn't know how to read at home. Their parents weren't sure which books to choose. Their parents weren't sure how to help them read at home, what questions to ask, how to talk to them about books. And that made it really tricky. And it made it more of like a chore for them. Which brings me to the next one, which was requirements. And this is kind of a two-part thing in which I was asking them, had too much homework, too much on their plate, too much other activities, and too many requirements. They didn't have time to read. We know how busy things can be these days with sports, with activities, all those things. Reading became a requirement. It became a chore for them, something they needed to check off. They were watching the clock to make sure they got those 20 minutes in. Okay, I did 20 minutes. I did 15 minutes. I did 10. I need to write it down, sign off on it. It wasn't enjoyable. We want students to be reading every night because they enjoy it, because they love doing it, because they love sharing it with other people. So because of these reasons, I felt like I needed to come up with something to really help them enjoy reading and make sure it became a natural habit at home that the whole family enjoyed. So that's when I came up with the idea of take-home book bags, and my students loved these. Families did too. I got lots of responses from families saying how much they enjoyed doing these at home. So I used take-home book bags. I would use these bags are from Really Good Stuff, and they were perfect size. Each bag that I sent home had a topic, a theme, or an author that the whole thing was centered around. So for example, the one I'm going to share with you today is all about feelings and emotions, which I think is such an important topic for students to be reading about and sharing with their families. So everything went into the bag. The first thing that I put into the bag is I would put in 4 or 5 books. All of these books were centered around the theme of the bag. So this one was feelings, so My Friend is Sad, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, Chester the Brave, When Really Worried. I would put in 4 to 5 books. I would often do paperback books because they're cheaper, and I would get these books from library sales or yard sales where they would be 25 cents or less. So if they did get lost, which really didn't happen very often, it didn't cost very much money to replace them. So I would put any book that related to the theme into the book bag, and that was the only requirement of the book bag, was that they read. They had the book bag for a week, and they had 4 or 5 books to read and reread throughout the week. So I required them to read. The rest of the book bag I made voluntary. So the next thing that I put in was a writing journal. When I first started out, I just used a spiral-bound notebook or a composition book. I would put the topic on the cover. On the first page, there was a sign-in sheet, which students got a kick out of. They loved adding their name and the date. They were very proud of this, of signing into the journal. There was a different one for each book bag. And then I would put 3 to 5 prompts on the next page. And I encourage families to use those questions as conversation starters, as discussions. And I really encourage them to go through all of them together as a family, just talking. And it really got them, they weren't comprehension questions. And it was just to get them talking and connecting the book to their own life or to the world around them or to other books, really making those connections. And then if they chose, it wasn't required, they could choose one of the topics, and there was writing pages in the back and drawing pages, and they could either respond to the question with writing or with a picture. And so that would stay in the bag. They could see what other people had written and put in there. The next thing that I would put in was a game or a craft, and I would make this super simple. I didn't go to the store and spend a lot of money. I didn't buy board games. I made everything myself, which took a while. But I made a different game or activity or craft for each book bag. And because I made them simple, I put everything that was needed into the bag. So for example, this is one that I made. All the pieces went into this zip bag. These are the directions. And then there's some feeling cards that I created, and I would laminate these. And then the questions and the game that the families would play, they would have these prompts, and students would respond with how they would feel. So, for example, if you are lost, how would you feel? You just won your first basketball game, how do you feel? So that's the game that I would put in. Everything, all the materials would go in. Every once in a while I'd have to add in dice or playing pieces, but everything was super simple for families to do. It didn't require lots of extra materials. It didn't require extra cost on my part. The next couple pieces of the book bag I put in a folder, and then I would just label the outside of the folder with the theme of the book bag. And this next one is my favorite part, besides the books, of course, my favorite part of the book bag. And so these are family activities. Each book bag I would put about 3 to 5 activities inside that they can do with their families. And this really was, the purpose of this was to get them engaged with their families and outside and moving and really interacting with the topics of the books in their bag. So oftentimes I would ask them to go outside. If it was a book bag about insects, they would go outside and they would look for insects. If they were learning about a famous athlete, they could go to the library and research more about that athlete. If it was an author book bag, for example, Laura Numeroff, they'd go to the library and look for more Laura Numeroff books. There was more games that they could play with their friends or their family. This just really built those relationships with family. It got them up and moving. It really brought the books to life and helped them see that books are a part of our lives and there's so much that we can do with them. This last part I didn't always include. So I have an activity sheet for each bag, but I didn't always use them. There were years where I was required to collect homework from my students, and this kind of helped fulfill that requirement. But I don't necessarily suggest using a worksheet because we really want the students to read the books and to just talk about them with their families and really engage with them and not necessarily have a worksheet to do with them. But those are in there in case I felt like a student needed to practice a certain skill or they weren't really connecting with the book. This could help them out a little bit, so I had that in there as well. So I saw such huge benefits from doing this at the school. Some of the benefits that I saw were the students now had access to books. They were reading every single night. They had 4 to 5 new books every single week to bring home and to share with their families that they could read and reread. They had it for a whole week so they didn't have to rush through the books. And it really built that quality time and those relationships with their family. Their families were reading aloud together. They were playing the games together. They were talking about their books. These book bags really provided a guide for parents who didn't know how to talk about books, who didn't know what questions to ask, who didn't know which books to use. This gave them that guide. It helped them help their child with the reading. It provided a role model at home. Students always see us reading to them at school, but then when they get home, parents are busy. They're making dinner, they're cleaning the house, they're doing their own work. This provides a reading model. Parents had something to read to their kids. Parents had something to talk about with their kids. And again, it built that engagement with the books, and it expanded on students' social skills. They were talking with their families, with their friends about the books. They were coming into school and telling each other, oh, this book bag was really awesome, you should check it out next. There were awesome books in it. So they got really excited, and they learned to talk about books. They were talking about books in school. They were talking about them at home. So not only were they enjoying them, they were having discussions with them. It also bridges that gap between home and school. So a lot of times kids go home and their parents ask them, what did you learn in school today? And they say, I don't know. And this really gave them the opportunity. I would create book bags around the themes we were learning in social studies and science and math. And this allowed students to carry over what we learned in school to home without being asked that specific question. So they could take out a social studies, a solar system book bag, and we might be learning about that in school, and they could tell their parents, oh, we learned this about Neptune today, or this, I they would read something in the book and they would bring it back to class and talk about it in social studies. So that went back and forth. That was another huge benefit of the book bags. So it was such a positive thing in my classroom and such a great thing that I did with my students. And it took a little bit of work, especially when I first started out, finding all those resources and pulling them all together and putting them all in, all those games, the activities, the family activities, the worksheets, the journal prompts, putting them all together. So what I did to make it a lot easier for you is I've created, I think there's over 50 book bags now, I think. If you check out this link right here, I have enough for a class set, so there are 30 in this link. And to make it easy for you, you have everything that I've shared with you, except for the books, of course. They have the worksheet, the family activities, the journal cover, those journal prompts, even the journal writing templates, and the sign-in sheet are included. The activities, all of the materials for the activities are included. There are sample book lists for every theme book bag, or every author book bag. There are book lists that you don't necessarily need to use those books, but I've given 10 examples of books just to get you started. There are the tags for the books are included. If you want to use a pocket chart to check out the books, there are pocket chart tabs for you. All of that is part of each book bag. And all you need to add is the books. So this was great for the entire year. I had enough for the whole class, and it took us, each student could check out a different book bag every week for the entire year. This created a great routine for parents. They knew what to expect. They knew when the book bags were coming home. They knew when to send them back. They knew what they needed to do with the book bags, but it switched it up because each one was different. It followed the same routine, but each one was different. So I've included a link here and also in the description of this video, and if you look at this link, you can buy each book bag individually depending on the needs of your class and the size of your class, so you'll see the individual links if you click there. So feel free to ask me any questions, and I can't recommend these enough because they were such a game changer in my classroom, so that I hope that you can use them as well and that you see the positive results that I did.